So far, Sinclair has had a fiery homecoming. And trust me, it's not going to get any better. In fact, it's going to get much worse. When they got to Sinclair's home, it was in flames. The largest mansion, which was standing in the innermost part of Kromer. On either side of the most direct way inside it were nails with prosthetic bodies, as if they were the victims of mass crucifixion. Either that, or they've been given the Vlad the Impaler treatment. Dante tried to imagine what the town would have looked like in peaceful times, when the trees near the town still had lush, verdant leaves, and didn't look dead. Also how Sinclair would have been during such times, or when everyone around him hadn't died. Happiness or despair. They couldn't paint a clear picture of either. Dante hopes that Sinclair braced himself for how he was going to be, based on what was to come. Ishmael saw this as awful. The nailed prosthetic users were in place in what used to be a garden. Yeah, it definitely looked like Vlad the Impaler was in town. And the flames were ready to consume everything around it, while everyone was focused on the display of N-Corp's kills. Yes, kills on the nails. Sinclair was more focused on the corner of that yard. He saw that their graves were dug up. Sinclair's expression alone was enough to make it clear who they were for. Yisang saw this as the devil's work, to execute the dead, his father, his mother, and his sister. They should be buried. Then Ulysses noticed one unidentified straight ahead. The whistling made it clear who it was to Sinclair. This person made it clear who they were as well. She saw it as just too funny when you think about it. Then someone walked out of the burning household. It was Kromer, and her laugh was simply sinister in every way possible. She asked, "Why put so much effort into burying bodies that can't even rot?" Sinclair then said, "Kromer!" like Batman would say, "Joker!" Honestly, this even sounds like a Batman origin story. It even has the brutally murdered parents. I think it might be slightly worse for Sinclair, as, in his case, he also had a sister. And then Kromer said that she was sure that he'll find them around there somewhere, if he looks hard enough. She does remember nailing those three, where if he was a good boy, she might tell him where they were, noting that he's grown a spine coming all the way there, enough to look at a few dead bodies. Sinclair was struggling to comprehend. Why? Why all this? Ulysses asked where the before team went. They should have turned up at that point. Kromer noted that Sinclair has some buddies. She then pointed to, some of those filthy ratlets that snuck in there. She turned on the light and revealed Effie, and he did not look in good shape. Gregor didn't like this sight. None of them did. Effie was barely breathing. His limbs cut away and deformed prosthetics were crudely lodged in their place. Sinclair was hit hard by this. Faust estimated that in his current state it will take around 2 days for him to die, his impalement amplifying his suffering. Dante was unsure of what to do. Auretes told them that she knows how to end a life with as little pain as possible. She's done this a few times. She needs them to give her the order, though. Dante looked at both Gregor and Ishmael, and they basically agreed with the sentiment, do what you need to, just make it quick for him. Auretes did the deed so that Effie could rest in peace. This made Kromer laugh, as if she was a gender bent of the Joker. Sinclair was not amused by this, as if her bad taste wasn't enough, while they heard something break, which is Effie being put out of his misery. Kromer laughed at this, finding it hilarious to watch them care for each other when they're all going to meet the same fate anyway, asking if it's brought Sinclair back. His face back then was real priceless. Sinclair then told Kromer that she had to die, seeing that as the right way, that she'll die by his... Then he was interrupted by the sound of a nail dragging across the floor. Guido was back. They thought that they took him down. Yet he was back at full strength, as if the last battle didn't happen. The sinners made a deep groan of contempt. Kromer then asked Guido why he failed to take out the others. He asked for forgiveness regarding his ineptitude from the one who grips. His incompetence allowed them to escape. No, actually it was because they kicked your hard enough. Kromer told him that he has to stay alert. He never knows what's hidden under those cursed steel craniums. He shall keep the word of the one who grips at heart. Kromer then said that she'd be heading back, now that the reunion would be over. Then Sinclair exploded with rage, shouting at her, swearing that he'll grab her by his hand, and Kromer then said, nope, it's always the other way round. The long smirk danced around her face. It was hard to tell if it was the violent blaze or her vice that was all-consuming. She was the one who grips. Not while morality at times... Let's try that again. Now, while morality at times in the Project Moon universe is often blurry, as in where it's harder to define, where binary morality or black and white morality is greatly oversimplifying it. In Kromer's case, it does apply, as she is definitely pure evil. This made Sinclair scream in rage, which surprised Heathcliff, and he was a candidate for the Person with the Worst Anger Issues award. Sinclair charged in Kromer's direction before any could stop him. The other N-Corp Inquisitors were in the way. Sadly for them, Sinclair had turned into a rage-fueled berserker at this point, swinging his weapon and crushed the heads of any that tried to grab him, killing the Heathcliff, it might be a good idea not to push him too far in future. Sinclair would normally stay in the back, but this was the first time he charged out like this. Yeah, this was another surprise for Heathcliff, asking why he was in the back if he could do that. Well, it was because Kromer pushed him too far, by hitting him where it really hurts. Guido then remembered with clarity that he had ended their lives, which includes torn brain tissue still through the cracks of their skulls. Yet the heretics are before him on their feet. Gregor called him out on his own miraculous recovery. He gazed at Dante, and it didn't take much for him to figure out that it was because of them. The one possessing the head of a heretic. The false shepherd enticing that herd into blasphemy. Sorry. Apparently, the before team committed the grave sin of entering the site of hallowed rites with their unclean bodies. They were punished with the same penalty as heretics, along with being subjected to the humiliation of bodily mechanical intrusion being installed against their will. He sees the damned dozen as different, seeing the worship of a heretic as less severe than indulging in heresy itself, where as long as they were willing to repent and cleanse their minds of sin, they, the Hammer, were willing to demonstrate forgiveness. So he implores the pitiable, foolish sinners, led astray by temptation, to shake off the allure of that false miracle and kneel before him. It's even worse when they actually believe their own propaganda. This silenced both sides. Dante then jokingly said that they've been under their spell this whole time. Who would have thought that? It wasn't funny. Certainly not to Ishmael, who was angry at how Guido was insulting them, not even seeing them as human. Dante called her out on everyone calling them clockface all the time. And then she implied that Guido made that look innocent, and besides, she's never called them that. Heathcliff basically told Faceplate... He told Faceplate to go himself, as fancy words won't persuade them to turn on Dante. Seeing Guido's brain is just as defective, if not more so. Guido basically said, "Oh well, it was worth a try," and then said they were no different from those that they have hung and nailed after all. He is the hammer. He is the tool for the one who grips, tasked with the great mission to pierce the false flesh of heretics. He shall bind thee to a nail, lay thee down furthest from soil, for they who shan't repent. And Heathcliff was looking bored during this, asking when he was going to be finished with this stupidly long taunt. And then Guido finished that by saying, "Is not granted rest beneath the earth." And then they battled. Now, before we move forward, I have this theory why K-Corp are letting this happen within their territory, slaughtering its citizens inside the nest. While it's not as large scale as a certain waxy angel of death caused to the nest of V-Corps in District 22, it's significant enough to be noticeable, especially if the whole town is on fire. The reason for this is obvious. Simple greed. Carl was a town that dealt with manufacturing high-end prosthetics, the kind that the gaze office would have, which meant that they are mostly synthetic, with a human brain in there. And since K-Corp's singularity is a bullet with a chemical formula that gives those shots with it or rather buy it, a temporary healing factor, this would decrease the profits in their more expensive option. So that deal made under the table was to destroy the manufacturing capability in any that would maintain that. Yeah, especially in that world, it all comes down to money. It's like not wanting peace, as that would mean no demand for an arms industry. Who knows how many of these kinds of deals occurred between the wings, as in this case. K-Corp wasn't weakened by an attack by a distortion. It was actually quite secure. Well, Lobotomy Corporation certainly made deals with K, R, T, and W Corp to complete the Seed of Light project, something which they'd rather not draw attention to. Otherwise, the head would send arbiters to get answers out of them, if they see it as necessary. This was the second time that Guido was fought. He fell like the other Inquisitors. He made the ground shake with the weight of his body and his armor falling. They weren't sure if he was truly dead, as they were too exhausted to bother and take his helmet off to check if he was still breathing. Although the berserk Sinclair was making sure that one of the Inquisitors was dead by repeatedly jabbing his spear end of the halberd that he was using into the dead Inquisitor. The corpse was mangled beyond recognition, enough for any of them to say, "They're clearly dead, you can stop now." As blood and organs were spilling out all over the floor, Roger told him to calm down. He didn't give a about this, as he just wanted to destroy his enemies, rage and tears being expressed. He made it clear that he wanted to kill them all, showing that his rage was derived from personal loss. Someone had to stop him, but none dared to do so. Even those that wouldn't hesitate to do so under normal circumstances. He was too blinded by vengeful fury to listen to any of them regardless. Yet Don Quixote volunteered to remedy this, knowing of a way to bring him back to his senses, which involved her jumping Sinclair, pinning him to the ground. Yes, pinning him to the ground and pummeling his face. Rodia asked if they should do something. Ryosho advised against that, as it wasn't worth intervening. After a while of doing that, she stopped. She then asked how that felt. Sinclair struggled to speak. Don Quixote apologized for her rash action. She often was overcome by fervor, rampaging the same as a riderless horse, so her friends helped her come to herself by beating her senseless. And this was considering that you're crazy to begin with. At times, it was the only way to knock some sense into her. Ishmael noted that would make Virgilius a good friend of hers as well. Rodian was amused by this, although Don Quixote would have some dispute about that. Sinclair cried his bruised eyes out. He wanted to get Kromer for what she's done. To go to his home and skewer her with a stake. And then the sobbing drowned out the rest, although he was calmer than he was before. He then said that he lost everything overnight. Back then, the Nago-Untama came. Though they weren't paraded and out in the open, but at some point, people calling themselves Hammers showed up, one by one, and he stopped there. It was too painful to continue, and Roger was comforting, telling him to not push himself. Sinclair still thinks that sometimes this was all a bad dream, and he's having problems waking up. It always comes every morning before he opens his eyes. Maybe next time he'll wake up and see his familiar ceiling. He burst into tears after that. The others were patient and waited for him to settle down. They each understood that he has something to deal with, explaining his previous behavior. This was preferable to seeing him as a rage-fueled berserker. They waited for the flames to mostly die down before Sinclair led the others to the basement. He then opened the door, which revealed a long underpass leading to an unknown destination. Yes, this was revealed to them. Dante was surprised to find a tunnel down there. Sinclair then told them that if his guess was right, this passage would lead them to the branch facility. Heathcliff asked why he was keeping that shaft in his basement. Sinclair told him that it wasn't there before. This confused Heathcliff, asking how he'd know that they'd need to get to the basement. Sinclair compared it to how magnetic fields draw a compass northwards. He was brought there by intuition. He asked Faust if it was what it was, that the damned dozen were sensors to locate the golden bars. Faust avoided the question and then said that, judging from the material, the tunnel seems to have been made relatively recently, dug by N-Corp's expeditionary forces when they occupied Kor. Their presence won't make going deeper into the branch facility easy or quick. Yes, they would most likely encounter N-Corp's forces on the way to the branch facility. They should move once they were ready. Dante was silent, looking at Faust. She told them not to give her that look. She's not in a position to comment on it. Actually, you are. There's enough evidence so far to come to that conclusion. Even Heathcliff could probably figure it out by now, with his anger-fueled mind. And he's someone that, if it doesn't involve hitting it repeatedly, he's not the man for the job. The damned dozen are the ones that locate each golden bar, due to their personal connections with where they were. After they fought the Inquisitors in the way, they arrived within the branch facility. It was not as well preserved as the one that they visited in District 4. N-Corp's Inquisitors have been redecorating it and have been using that branch facility as a base for a while, complete with an assortment of torture devices and bits of flesh and machinery, like those that they saw in Kor. One of the citizens of Kor was begging the Inquisitors for mercy that they were unlikely to give, as it hurt so much. One of the Inquisitors mocks that they were speaking of suffering, the other seeing it as a false cry. The citizen of Kor swore that their pain was real. The first Inquisitor asked, did it not hurt to attach the impurities to their flesh? Did their conscience not scream as they rejected their humanity? The second one saw them as too far gone to repent, asking if the absence of tears was not saying enough, seeing them as one that is only pretending to confess. The Kor citizen told them that they could shed tears, begging them. The first Inquisitor was willing to entertain this, to verify this. a genuine effusion of sorrow suggesting humanity. They were thankful for this from them. They shifted their eye. The first Inquisitor saw this as heretical depravity that knew no bounds. They made vile devices that mimicked tear glands. They needed to see with their own true eyes that this wasn't the case. They'd let them go if that was the case. If they can confirm that their eye socket is indeed flesh and blood. This made the Carl citizen begging them to stop. Roger attacked the first Inquisitor, the other seeing the heretics are truly pests, never alone, with a habit of getting in the way of their great task, seeing them as kindred creatures. Roger shrugged at that. She apparently wanted to take charge for once. Then the sinners fought the other Inquisitors. After making the Inquisitors suck their own nails, a voice was speaking, a faint one in the corner, complimenting their fighting. They've gotten better at that. Gregor recognized Sard, and she also wasn't in good shape. She was bitten and gnawed at by the Pecatula. Ishmael asked her if she was alright, could she get up easily. Sadly, it was clear to Dante that she could barely talk, never mind speak. Even then it was slow and filled with pain. Sold asked how Effie was, believing him to be alive. Everyone was hesitant to answer this desperate question. For good reasons. Let's see. Would you casually say, "No, Sword, Effie is dead. I ordered Otis to mercy kill him to spare him 2 days of slowly dying in complete agony impaled on a nail in such a way to achieve that effect, while Kromer mocks this concern." Hongru wisely told her that, yes, he's doing fine now. This was only partially true. Yes, he was fine now, but he was dead. None of the others elaborated on that. Otis saw this as enough chatter. More Pecatula were approaching. Dante believing that their guilt about being dishonest Assad gained physical form, or at least it seemed that way. After fighting the Pecatula, they heard that familiar yet ominous nail dragging across the floor from not too far away. Seriously, how the is that bloke not dead? Did they give him some of the K-Corp compound that the HP bullets are made from? Pumping into his body? Like he's Bane with that super steroid venom? Otis then suggested that combat protocol be updated to include steps to confirm that their foes are dead. I'm with the army bird there. It's like those villains that just assume that the heroes are dead without checking if they are dead. I mean, the Austin Powers movies literally signpost that for the audience to make that even more obvious. It was in fact Guido, who still wanted the heretics exterminated. Dante asked how long he's been. Guido was approaching slower than before, but he was focused on Dante, saying that the rest shall be purified. Dante understood that they needed to rewind the clock. Most were either dead or gravely injured. This wasn't a battle that Dante and those barely holding on had any chance of winning. Then Sod said, "Please stop." She was holding out her gun, aiming it at Dante, telling him to stay still, threatening to blow their head off if they turned back the clock. This surprised Dante. Sal told them not to look at her like that. She can't hear them. But she'll tell them this. The hammer and nail promised to let Effie go if she helped to get rid of them. You really think they'd honour the deal that they made with you? When they're leaving you to the Picatula? A deal with a devil doesn't always start with getting screwed over, but it always ends with it. Guido was growing impatient, coming to Dante and grabbing them by the neck, then grabbing their head tightly with the other hand as if to crush it. There was creaking, cracks, and rattles ringing inside their head. It was close to shattering. Dante feared dying, questioning if they were a better manager, things would have turned out differently. They remembered Heathcliff menacingly asking if there was a way to open up their head so they could see what's inside. Tough luck, Heathcliff. You're missing out on a good show. Implying that he was the one of those who was dead at this point. Then they heard a sound. The sound of something breaking. Fortunately for Dante, it wasn't their head. It was a painful stab in the back by Sinclair with a nail, his rage kicking in. This staggered Guido, and Sinclair was gasping for air. He was struggling to stay conscious, yet he mustered the strength to do this. Dante was able to escape Guido's grasp thanks to him. Yet Guido stood firm, despite this, collected his breath and slowly turned around, seeing Sinclair as a filthy heretic. Due to this, Sinclair saw the hammer and nail as all insane out of their minds. Sinclair, they'd fit in perfectly in Arkham Asylum. Guido then continues to speak, stating that the one who grips, or gender-bent Joker, once said that he could have become the one as well, seeing this as a shame, seeing him as gripping in the wrong direction. Dante told him to run away. They couldn't help him. Sinclair refused, as he's not running anymore. Sod liked that answer. Then a shot was fired. It struck Guido's head. He said, "You, who bring ruination upon yourselves, the hammer shall continue to pursue you." He then fell to the floor motionless after that. That bullet to the head finally killing that. Clearly, whatever he was using, this was something that he couldn't heal from. Sod dropped her handgun. Clearly that was her last bullet. This surprised Dante. Sod suspected that Effie was dead, having seen through their lie, as it wasn't even somewhat believable. Gregor wanted to get Sod out of there. She'd be okay. They just needed to stop the bleeding and get her patched up. Ishmael was willing to get a tourniquet. Sod basically told them not to bother. She could hardly lift a finger, and to be honest, I can't blame her. She's lacking her shield, she's out of ammo, she's currently dead weight. Besides, the Inquisitors will keep on coming. They need to keep moving down the branch facility. She'll hold them off, implying that she'll at least slow them down. Well, she will for a few seconds. Sinclair didn't want her to. Ishmael reminded her that she could hardly lift a finger. She couldn't watch their back when she was in such a mess. Sol then expected them to nod at her and be on her way. Who cares about one who volunteered to stay behind? Sinclair didn't want her to sacrifice herself for them. This made it pretty awkward for her, wanting a cool farewell, telling Faust to take those absolute dorks out of there. Faust would give Virgilius her regards. Sald told her no need, just to tell him to come visit and say hello someday. She knows what she means. Faust understood, and after Dante did a rewind, they headed for the next part of the branch facility, leaving Sal to die from the Inquisitors. That will likely provide backup for those killed later. They stayed silent for a long while after that. After that, they fought and eluded the Inquisitors that they encountered in this converted branch facility. They even encountered an interrogation that they could choose to interfere with. Then they encountered something else. A grotesque chamber, the first signs of which were the sounds of beasts crawling around. At least, that's what it sounded like to Heathcliff. Dante noted this as well. Something moving along the floor. A beast that was vaguely familiar. Gregor asked if they were abnormalities. Ishmael told him and the others to take a closer look. They're not abnormalities, as the emblems on them were the same as the Inquisitors. Faust recognized this as EGO corrosion, as in what happens when you use EGO when you're not suitable for wielding it. The in-universe explanation why some suits and weapons have stat and level restrictions, where they can wield it as long as they don't do it for too long, as it takes time for the corrosion to be complete. As it happened there. Gregor remembered the nauseating state, likely remembering a time when his morale was lowered and he lost control of his EGO. That one time, it was likely one of those EGO that wasn't truly his. Ishmael remembered that it happened in battle once, when she was on the verge of a breakdown. Feeling like she was being devoured, Faust didn't see it as consumption in a literal sense, but it does eat away at their essence. While the first floor was exclusively a prosthesis torture chamber floor, the second floor was not. That floor was for deliberately inducing corrosion, likely to enhance their inquisitors against the heretic. Quite hypocritical, isn't it, for one that exalts humanity, as this makes those affected by this look less human. The corroded Inquisitor wasn't capable of speech. It was moving around, like the others. It made Dante have complex feeling. Was their artificial head worth raging over? They were willing to transform themselves into something worse looking, to lose themselves and become possessed. They were also concerned about what would happen if they claimed the golden bar. They'd be capable of even greater insanity. A certain fictional butler was right, wouldn't you say? Some people really do want to watch the world burn. Well, the hammer and nail are certainly making a start on that on Car. Dante asked if it would be used for their benefit. Then it occurred to them. Are they any different from these unsightly zealots when they're searching for the golden bars without knowing what they'll be used for? The main difference is that at least most of the damn dozen are sane. Faust and Virgilius are likely to know the purpose, but they're unlikely to speak of this anytime soon. They fought the corroded Inquisitors. Some were four-legged beasts like the one they had initially encountered. Some had snakes for arms. Then they encountered corroded Inquisitors that likely used some prototypes of mimicry, the EGO weapon of nothing there. Either this is where it was originally stored, or they sent some mimicry swords there in case of an emergency. They encountered many things on the second floor, including an insight to what the hammer and nail do when they're not purging the heretics and the unclean. There were 3 trials that the Inquisitors faced. The first one was the Trial of Innocence, which involved a heated red path that risked shoes melting. A sign saying, "Prove your humanity through weakness and supposition. Sear a path with mobilization." Completing this trial granted a seal of innocence. Then there was the Trial of Tears, which involved a tightly closed door with a sign that said, "Prove your terror and fears, fill this vessel with tears." It involved sitting on a chair nearby, but it was needed to open the door. Filling the bowl with tears revealed the Seal of Tears. Then there was the Trial of Atonement, which involved a chair with nails. On the parts where one would sit on it, the sign said, "Prick yourself with a thorn and repent for yourself with pain." It was a torture device intended as a trial for an Inquisitor, not for the heretic. One of them used this and the Seal of Atonement was gained. It would seem that they wanted the Inquisitors to demonstrate their capacity for feeling pain, as without that, life had no meaning. The heated red path was likely a reference to those that walked on hot coals. In India, it was seen as a rite of passage to test a person's strength and courage. In religion, it was a test of faith. Certainly in the Spanish village of Soria, and in parts of Greece and Bulgaria. As for the chair, it's the iron chair, where it was a torture device used in Europe's Middle Ages. The Chinese used a variation of this from as early as 1701, all the way up to the start of the 20th century. It was made to install fear, where they often had others that weren't getting tortured to watch other people get tortured. And if that didn't work with getting them to confess, they'd be in the chair as well and experience physical pain. There was also the risk of a slow death by infection. I suspect that the Inquisitor that goes through this trial would have their wounds treated afterwards.
As for what else was encountered, they found a book related to the hammer and nail. They took it with them, even though what was in there gave them a headache, likely filled with more insanity than your average day in Wonderland, and that was likely based on Lewis Carroll's opium hallucinations. They had a few other encounters there. They were witness to torture, specifically of a prosthetic user. Sinclair wanted to intervene, and Dante agreed. This resulted in a part of a sign being gained. Then they saw some prosthetics imprisoned. Sinclair wanted them to be freed. Dante agreed, even though it would cause trouble for them. This resulted in another part of the sign gained. Then they encountered 2 corroded Inquisitors that had the power of speech, telling them to prove their worth. They showed them the 3 seals and they were let through without incident, and another part of the sign was gained. This would come into play later.
The finale of Chapter 3 is next. Until next time. Hail the rabbit!